Good evening, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. During this episode, Emily Simpson, a native and resident of Sydney, Australia, and I will explore one way to manifest the creation of a public permanent labyrinth in a city park. Hi, Emily. Welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's evening here, day where you are, I guess.
Yeah, hi Christiana. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to have our Aussie mates down there on. I had Lorraine Rhoda on this summer, um,
Great.
and now having you on, it's really icing on the cake. And you're going to be a workshop presentation too, a workshop presenter
Yes.
too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, really looking forward to seeing Bainbridge Island.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since your gathering workshop presentation is sort of a reflection of the gathering theme, which is honoring the labyrinth environment, co-creating with nature, I'm going to approach this episode cyclically, naturally cyclically, and take us from seed time to harvest in how you created this whole opportunity and possibility and how you brought it to fruition. So my first question is, how and when did the seed, this idea of a labyrinth in Sydney, come to you?
Well, the first time I walked a labyrinth was in 2009 at the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. I was there doing a workshop with Jean Houston, and a friend of a friend had suggested, go and if you're in San Francisco, go walk the labyrinth. So we did on our last day, and it had a profound impact on me. At the time, I was navigating a lot of grief, and perhaps because my need was great, the labyrinth kind of seized me, and I fell in love with it. And I came back to Australia and went looking for one and couldn't find any in Sydney. And I live nearby a big park called Centennial Park, and I walk around it quite often in the mornings. And I was just walking around it one morning, and I wandered into a field that I hadn't seen before. And it was just this beautiful, tranquil field. And I thought, and it sort of sloped gently down towards the duck pond. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to have a labyrinth here? So that was sort of the seed, I guess, or that was the seed germinating perhaps for the first time. But it was sort of a simple wish. It wasn't a thunderbolt or anything. It was just, so I just sort of walked on and just that, but it stayed with me. And the more I talked about it with friends, it sort of grew as an idea. And then I went on this journey to build it.
Well, so you had this idea, and was it specifically so did you automatically assume that it would be in Centennial Park, or did you look at other sites around Sydney looking for a site for a labyrinth?
Well, Centennial Park it's a big park. It's 500 acres in the middle of the city. It's a much loved, of course, the beloved public space, and it's right near where I live. So, never underestimate the power of self-interest as a motivation. I thought, wouldn't it be great to have one that I could walk to? That would be even better. And the only other park that I considered is called the Domain, which is on the harbour. But it's a much smaller park, and they wouldn't have had the space. I don't think they would have allocated it for something like this, whereas Centennial Park is a big space, so putting something in was, well, it was still a big hurdle, getting the government approval, but it was more likely, I think.
So when you walked into this field, what was the date? When did this happen?
Oh, I actually don't have the actual date, but it was about this time because I know it was spring, and it's a beautiful spring day here today. So it was probably September or October at that time, and it was 3 or 4 months. I'd been in San Francisco in May, so September, maybe late August, early September, something like that.
Of what year? What year did you say?
Oh, this was 2009.
2009. Okay.
Mm.
And so then you had this idea, and everybody kind of supported you and talked it up, and
Mm.
so then what did you do next? You submitted a proposal.
Well, yes, yeah. So the parklands is managed by a board of trustees on behalf of the state government, and they hadn't built anything there since our bicentennial in 1988. No new structures, and they get hundreds of submissions every year of people wanting an ice skating rink or all sorts of, or a swimming pool or stuff, and they guard it fiercely, and rightly so. They protect the green space for the community. And so yes, as you said, but the more I talked to friends about it, they all kind of lit up and going, that's a great idea. And so I got more and more encouraged. And then I found out, you have to submit a proposal to the board, and I had several friends who are corporate and other friends who have experience with non-profits and with government. And so they helped me create a proposal that would look professional and be considered relevant to a sort of body like that.
So had you ever submitted a proposal for anything else, like a grant or anything before this one?
No, I'd never had anything to do with government before. This was a whole new world. In a previous life, I'd run a small business. I've been an entrepreneur, which I'd had a business for 15 years, a mail order business. But small business, you just keep to yourself. You don't have to deal with government. So this was a big change. Entering the bureaucratic maze is a whole other ballgame.
Well, that was so I'm going to point to key aspects of this, because I think it's really important that people, get these key points of how to go about doing this. And for probably for you, it was just talking it up. And it just so happened that as some of your friends had this ability and had this background and experience. But that's really what it's about. It's really about getting it out of yourself and what you would like to see, and as a personal wish, and spreading it out to your circle of friends, because you never know who's going to pop up as the one or the two or the three people who will help you formulate just exactly what you need and fill in the blanks, what's missing in your own experience, in your own background.
Yes, that's exactly right. I kind of operate on the principle that everything you need is in your orbit somewhere. You've just got to keep asking, keep putting your hand up and asking, and someone will have the skill that you don't have to fill in that little piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so that's a really important piece right off the get-go, that you did that you talked to people and you got feedback, and from that it snowballed. So once the proposal was accepted, so
yes, there was a little bit of it wasn't initial, we had a bit of toing and froing. The board came back with they had two stipulations. They said I had to justify why a labyrinth would be an appropriate thing in a 19th century park, because that's what it was built in the 19th century. And so I had to address that. So I got on to Jeff Sayward and asked him about it, because he's the great historian. Mm-hmm. And he gave me several examples of things that would satisfy them. So he said, well, in 19th century England, they didn't have labyrinths in parks or in estates necessarily, but the great estates, the great gardens in England often put in follies, which they called follies. So they had they had classical Grecian temples and grottos and statues to Greek goddesses and things. So he said you could draw a line between that and say, well, a labyrinth is a classical symbol. So you could describe it as a folly at the very least, if you needed to persuade a bureaucrat. And the other thing they wanted to know was whether or not there was any relevance for Aboriginal culture. And I spoke to several Aboriginal elders and asked them, well, I showed them the Chartres labyrinth, but that didn't mean anything to them. But when I showed them the Seventh Circuit labyrinth, a couple said, well, not exactly like that, but one of them said, look, there are several ceremonies where everybody spirals into a central point and then everybody spirals out. And so I thought, well, there may not be physical examples here. And also Australia is the only continent where there aren't ancient physical examples. So the ones that Jeff writes about, the 5,000-year-old examples, they're in Europe, they're in North and South America, and in China, but they're not here. But then the Aborigines were nomads. They didn't build permanent structures, so it's not surprising. But if they use this sort of spiraling into a central point, then even if there weren't physical examples, there's a sort of cultural imprint here of the sense of the group walking together in a circular space. So I submitted that, and that seemed to satisfy them. And then they also added on buffer costs and various things, but they approved it, and that was like a miracle. No one could believe this. It's a very conservative trust. No one could believe that somehow it slipped through the net. And I found out later that the chairman of that board was a meditator. Mm. He didn't know about labyrinths per se, but so he was open to things spiritual, perhaps.
Well, it's interesting, the whole idea of the Aboriginal. We're getting feedback for some reason. I don't know why. But the Aboriginal, the whole idea of the spiral, I mean, the walkabout is key to any kind of Aboriginal society. And,
yes.
You can make definite collaborations or you can make a definite relation between this idea of pilgrimage and walkabout.
Yes.
That's what it is. And it's about the unfolding of the soul and learning what it is that you're meant to do in your life and how to be of service. And you ask anybody who's walked labyrinths a lot of times, and they'll say that that's very much what has been their experience. So, and it's what they say about labyrinths. So,
one of the Aboriginal elders said to me that after she'd walked the Chartres one, she said, it's a little bit like a songline because, and so we talked about it because the songlines are sort of, they're intuitive spaces through the country. They're based on landmarks where you follow the songlines home to your home country. So home to country is where your people came from. And I've always thought that's what it's like a pilgrimage. It's a return to the interior of yourself as you walk your way in to a heart space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
so in that, sorry. In that way, it is a bit like a songline because you're returning home to self.
Yeah, and then the other aspect of that for Indigenous cultures is the division into four. The four seasons. That's a very much a natural way of walking, of a spiritual quest. There's definite correlation between them. So, from the ones that I've made in sacred lands that are Indigenous, with a strong Indigenous past, they've all said, people who have visited them, Indigenous people, said, oh, yes, this is that. Oh, yes, there is definite relation here. There is a definite correlation. So that's great. Really interesting. So the proposal accepted, and so the next step was you had to, what I could call, prepare the soil in order to plant the seed. So talk a bit about this process. And I did read your bio on the website. So what did you have to do to support this coming to fruition? And just speak to that a little bit.
Well, as I said, there's not many labyrinths there weren't any when I started. There's a couple now, but at that stage, people had never heard of the labyrinth. They would instantly confuse it with a maze if you said it. And so I needed to there was a lot of education that needed to happen. And I thought, well, that the only way to understand the labyrinth is to experience it, really, because quite often when I talk to people about it and say, oh, explain how it works and what it is, and then they say, yeah, but how are you going to build the hedge? How are you going to?
Mm-hmm.
And so they instantly they couldn't imagine it. So I thought, it's experiential. They need to experience it. So I went to Chartres and did the training with Lauren, because I thought, I've got to educate myself first. I knew I loved it, but I didn't know that much about it. And I bought every book that I could find on it. And then I found Robert Ferre's workshop and got a canvas labyrinth from him, a Chartres one, a 36-foot Chartres one. And then I had to find a space where I could lay it out, which was quite a challenge because a lot of the little town halls and church halls, the smaller, halls, they're only 10 metres across, and this was 12 metres. So anyway, I found a converted church that's now an art gallery, which had this beautiful circular end with stained glass windows, and the canvas labyrinth would just fit with about 3 inches to spare.
Wow.
So we found a home for the canvas, and I started doing walks there once a month, and just play lovely, spooky music and have candles and the stained glass, and it was really beautiful. It was so I could create a really kind of sacred container in the space, in this contained space. And we had lots of different types of walks. We had, I did one called Poetry in Motion, where I had 2 actors on the stage behind the labyrinth reciting the poetry of Hafiz and Kabir and Rumi and I don't know, Teresa of Avila, anyway, anyone, the mystic poetry. And while people walked, and someone was playing the tabla gently. So it was this very beautiful event. I had another one there where we had crystal bowls playing while people walked. So we just kept experimenting with lots of different ways in, and people would bring their friends. And then one day Robert Ferre came out to do a labyrinth at Westmead Children's Hospital. He was doing a concrete one there, and so he came and agreed to speak. So we had an event, an evening event, I think it was, and 150 people turned up, and it was fantastic. and he was wonderful and very generous to do that and offer his time and help us. So it started sort of gathering its own momentum a little bit.
So to me, this aspect of what you were just saying, you have the foundation. Now you're planted, and you want to first of all, planting the seed, it seems to me, is raising public awareness of what labyrinths are and how they're used. So this is the way you accomplish this, by having many walks and workshops, having Robert Ferre there. And so it got out to more and more people. And so with all of these, did you charge a fee? So were you fundraising with every event?
Yes. Well, I first started, we hadn't got permission yet. So for the first 6 or 8 months, it was just, we weren't fundraising because we didn't, we didn't have anything to fundraise for. We charged, it was just a door fee to cover the cost of the hire. So maybe it was $10 or something. So that was just building community, getting people aware of the concept of the labyrinth and what it was. And then after we got permission, a few months after that, I got permission to paint the labyrinth onto the field itself in Centennial Park. And we had to use, water-soluble paint because it's, public park and everything. So 6 of us went out one day. It took us all day to work out how to do it. And but one of my friends has a history with sacred geometry, so she was sort of in charge. And we mapped it out and painted it. And we marked it with raddle, which is this funny sort of greasy chalk, which is used to mark the backs of sheep when you're sorting them. Mm-hmm. And my partner is a farmer, so we got all this chalk because we were nervous about, painting first. Mm-hmm. And so we marked it out in chalk and then in and then painted it with a little trolley. And then I repainted it every 2 or 3 weeks for the next 18 months. And actually I loved doing that. It was this beautiful, that became another sort of meditation, just because I'd go very early in the morning. It was just me and the dawn and the labyrinth, and I sort of developed a relationship with the path, you know, not with the path, with the pattern, with the field itself. It was like the sort of, you know, the negative of a photo. It was like I was engaging with it the other way. Does that make sense?
No, explain that a little bit further.
Well, just, you know, when you normally walk a labyrinth, you have a sense of, you know, Ariadne's thread. You have a sense of the path and the way it moves and all the turns and everything. But when you're painting it, it was like a sort of relationship with the reverse image, with the pattern itself.
Oh, okay.
Because I wasn't walking it, I was marking it, and so that was another whole, I don't know, it just gave me this. It was a beautiful thing to do. It was gave me deep pleasure painting. I was just painting over and kind of deepening the imprint in the land. And I found it very satisfying. I kind of miss it, actually. I used to love it. So we painted the labyrinth onto the field, and then we moved the walks from the art gallery. We'd had them there for 18 months, and then we had a year and a bit of walks in the park. And so we did, you know, anything there. Like if Australia Day, we'd have a walk, and I'd get some musicians to come and sing, and people would dance. And then, but actually the best one we did there was an interfaith walk, and it was the summer solstice, so it was just before Christmas in here, and I think there was 7 different faiths. So there was a Monsignor, Catholic Monsignor, a rabbi, an imam, Anglican minister, a Buddhist priest, and an Aboriginal elder, and they all walked, and that got a lot of attention, and a lot of people came to that event, and the local paper came and took a photo of all of these, you know, I call them wisdom keepers, for want of a better collective noun, of different faith leaders, and took a photo of all of us standing in the centre of this grass labyrinth, painted labyrinth, and it went on the front page of the Christmas issue of the paper, and that was syndicated through the whole of Sydney. So it was like another miracle. Somehow we just got a lot of attention, and so that boosted fundraising a lot, because suddenly they saw, you know, different faiths coming together. It was demonstrating it as a non-denominational or universal sacred path that welcomed all faiths and no faith, no. And so that was the way I was trying to sell it to Australians, that to take it out of the Christian context and let it be something broader, because it's broader and older and bigger than any religion.
Well, so explain a little. So this was on grass. This was a grass field, correct? So it had to be. It was mowed all the time. So the repainting it, was the design still there? Or did you have to go from scratch each time, or?
Oh no, the design was still there. It got a bit scuffed up from people walking it, so the path became a bit, you know, of a dirt track. But the actual pattern stayed. Even when they mowed it, the pattern was still there, enough for me to see, so I could repaint it. It actually holds quite well. Water-soluble white line marking paint works pretty well. 2 or 3. I mean, unless there's torrential rain for days and days, it holds.
And so talk a little bit more about, to me, what you're talking about here and what you're saying. There's a lot of different aspects to what you accomplished. And you did say that you had help, but coordinating everything, letting people know when to come where, and getting all of these different heads of different churches together to present. Did you do this all by yourself, or did you have help in all of these stages as well, in all the different?
Well, a bit of both. The interfaith walk came about because I read a book. By a woman called Ailsa Piper, and it's called Sinning Across Spain, and it's about her journey to walk the Camino, and it's this wonderful book, and it's not what you think it is. It's not a racy novel. The Sinning Across Spain is because she couldn't afford to travel to Spain, and so she put out an ad saying, I will carry your sins for you if you pay me. And she would walk people's sins the way they used to do in medieval times. And so she got, I don't know, 20 or 30 people agreed, and she took it very seriously. And they paid for her to walk the Camino. She walked it and did a little ceremony at the end and burnt their sins for them, and then wrote a book about it. It's this wonderful, wonderful book. And I read it and went, oh, I've got to meet this woman. She sounds fantastic. And I found her and met her, and she lived in Melbourne, but she happened to be coming to Sydney the next week. So we had lunch and we talked. And I talked about this and the idea of the labyrinth as a pilgrimage, a mini pilgrimage, an urban pilgrimage. And she said, oh, I have a dear friend who is a Catholic priest who would love to know about this. So I went to see him. And he ended up giving me $1,000 for the labyrinth. It was extraordinary. The church gave us $1,000. And he said, this is wonderful. Why don't we have a walk? And I was saying, well, I'd love to do something with, perhaps, Catholic and Jewish and Muslim, but I have no idea how to find, priests or rabbis or anything. And this guy, Tony Doherty, who's the Monsignor at this Catholic church, he said, oh, no, I can get you in touch with the rabbi. And then I spoke to the rabbi, and he got me in touch with the imam, and it just went around in this circle. It was extraordinary. They just kept saying, I said, this is, it would be great to have everybody in one space to show what this is. And so, yes, it was me coordinating it, but it wouldn't have happened unless I'd been having conversations with people who were lit up as well. So, like I said, everything's in your orbit. And Ailsa sort of came into the orbit, and she ended up being the 11th wisdom keeper in the final thing, in the opening ceremony, interfaith walk, because she's agnostic and a pilgrim. She's a spiritual seeker without any religious affiliation. And I thought it was important to demonstrate that as well, that it welcomes people of all faith and no faith. And it's so important when people feel they've lost their faith. The labyrinth is a safe space to go as well.
Well, it sounds to me that, and it's been my experience, that if a labyrinth wants to get built,
yes,
any obstruction or obfuscation will just fall away, and all you do is harness yourself to that labyrinth energy, and away you go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
It sounds to me that's exactly what was happening here. You just kept saying yes. Oh, yes, I'll meet this person. Yes, I'll.
Yeah.
And the book came to you, and I want to meet this. And so you just kept forwarding this energy and saying yes, yes, yes. And it just kept falling into place, which really is, to me, what labyrinth energy is. I mean, it is, this is it in a nutshell. So this is fascinating to hear your story of this, because I've certainly, on a very much smaller scale, have experienced this. And it's just wonderful to hear from, someone else doing that. This is, so this is another key point, though, that when you ask Spirit to be in alignment, or when you call to Spirit to say, hey, I want to be of service in this way, even if you don't say it in that way, then the next part of that is saying yes. If you are given something, then you act on it. This is all part of this intuitive spiritual journey that you take with a tool such as the labyrinth. A spiritual tool. So,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, that's exactly right. That's what it was. It was a big yes every day. It was a big yes. And I mean, theoretically, I was hilariously unqualified to do this. I had no prior qualifications. My main qualification was my enthusiasm for it. I fell in love with it. And so when I was fundraising and stuff, it was just whether or not somebody would be lit by the flame of my enthusiasm or not. And I kind of learned one of the gifts of it was about learning how to become a vessel for something greater than myself, and learning how to get out of the way, get my ego out of the way, so that I didn't get hurt when somebody said no or, didn't take it personally. I just sort of, no means next. I just kept going till I found a yes.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that's a big learning right there. Okay, so the seeds grown into a strong, healthy plant. You've got a certain amount of funds. Actually, how much did you raise? What was the total amount?
It was 534,000
Australian dollars.
Yeah, which is, I think it's 450 US or somewhere. I don't know, 400. I don't know. I'm not sure of the exchange rate, but yeah, it was expensive. It was expensive, and they added buffers on. They wanted a $50,000 maintenance buffer, and they wanted GST, goods and services tax, which was another 50,000. So they just kept adding. I think they kept upping it, to make it. I think they thought I'd run away and hide, and they said you can build it if you can raise the money. And so off I went and came back a year and a bit later with the money. And
so that's what it took, about a year, a little bit more than a year.
Yeah, 13 months or something. And mostly it was wasn't corporate donations. It was mostly private individuals. And again, this was where people were leaning in and introducing me to people. And so most of the big donors are people I hadn't met before, and they, they leaned in. They allowed themselves to be open to it. And so it was like I was searching for people that were on the same frequency, sort of. They were resonating with the idea. And there were many times I went into a meeting quite confident, thinking, oh, this person will get it. And they absolutely didn't and weren't interested. And then other people who I thought, oh, they'll never get it, they loved it. So I learned a lot about expectation. John O'Donoghue used to say expectations are resentments in waiting.
Yeah.
And it's so true. So I kind of learned to just accept whatever anybody's response was. I mean, it took time. In retrospect, I'm making it all sound easy. At the time, of course, I was crushed a few times and kind of limped away. But I gradually learned, okay, this is what being in service is about. It's about getting your ego out of the way. It's not about me. This is about the labyrinth, and whether they are aligning with that, whether they resonate with that or not. So I kind of, and also with the fundraising, there's a sweet story by Anthony DeMello, and he talks about some Indian guru who wanted to build a great temple, and his followers said, but Guru, where are we going to find the money? Where's the money going to come from for this? And he just looked at them and said, from wherever it is now. And that was it. I just thought, that's wonderful. That's Indian logic. It's brilliant. And I thought, okay, well, that'll be my motto. It's just the money was out there for the labyrinth somewhere. I just had to go find it. But it was waiting for me. I just had to, like an Easter egg hunt, I just had to go find a giant citywide Easter egg hunt.
And that you did. That was very impressive. Very impressive. So now you got the flowering of your plant going on. So that to me is like the design and installation of the labyrinth. Talk a little bit about that. Why? I mean, the sharp design, but considering the Aboriginal influence, why did you decide to go with that one? It sounds to me like that was in the initial proposal. But talk about the materials and all the rest of the whole process of the design and installation.
Well, I chose the chart probably because that's the first one I ever walked, and I fell in love with it. And I have a 7-circuit labyrinth in my garden, which I made as soon as I came back from Grace Cathedral that first time. And it's wonky and you know, it's made out of just crushed granite and mondo grass. It's very simple and a bit wonky, and I love it madly. And I'm still not entirely sure why that wasn't enough. Why wasn't it enough for me to have a little one in my garden? Why did it have to be this one in the park? Anyway, so, but the one that for Centennial Park, it is a beloved public space. Whatever we were going to submit had to be worthy of, you know, government, the blessing of the government here. And so it had to be something quite grand. We knew we were creating something was a sort of landmark labyrinth. So the Chart one, and we did it in sandstone. And Sydney is built out of sandstone. All the colonial buildings here are made out of sandstone, but it's a more dense stone than I think American sandstone might be. So sandstone was the obvious choice because it's Sydney. And yeah, I think, yeah, I fell in love with Chart, the Chart one. And what else? The materials, the design. Oh, we had to build a slab because the soil in the park is quite sandy and it doesn't have bedrock. So that was another element to it that added to the cost. The slab cost $70,000. And I discovered, you know, learned a lot about engineering and how complex it is to do a perfectly round slab, and a domed one. So it's 6 inches higher in the centre and domed out, and we had a big border, a 6-metre border around it. And so there were lots of things that you wouldn't have to consider if you were just doing a private one, but because it was public space, and then there were all these slip tests and things we had to do for occupational health and safety. So the dark stone that we had, went through 3 different types of dark stone before we found one that would pass the government slip tests. So the one that we ended up with is a Victorian blue stone, which is a granite that's almost black. It's grey black, so that added to the expense. The sandstone we used is a heritage grade. It's called Wonderbine, and it's reserved for government use for restoration of colonial buildings. So it's very expensive because it's so rare. So again, if I was doing it at home, you could use cheap sandstone and it would work. But this sandstone costs 4 times what the regular sandstone costs. So there were all these reasons why it ended up being so expensive. But it had to be up to the standard of what the government officials expected, they expect.
But did you have to have an actual landscape architect sign off on this? And
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So I had an architect donate his services, who was a friend of the family who he'd renovated my house a few years before, and he loved the idea and he wanted to do something that was public service, you know, and so he donated his services. So he did the actual drawings, the designs, and he helped me liaise with the government, with the bureaucrats when it was construction time and what would be required. And I think we got the structural engineers also donated their time, which was amazing. Hundreds of hours of time for the architect. Yes, sorry. So, yeah, did that answer the question? Sorry.
Yeah, and then so another question. Do you have in Sydney, I've been there. I was there during your summertime. And
yeah.
So I'm wondering, does it freeze at all? Do you have any issue with freezing in your winter?
No, it never gets that cold. Sydney we don't have a proper winter. We have a long summer. Mm-hmm. It gets hot in the field where it is. And the original design actually had trees around the labyrinth and benches, sandstone curved benches, which were beautiful. But the park, and this was one of the hurdles we had to overcome with the government, their protocols about green space, and they said no built objects in the landscape. So you couldn't have anything. So they said no benches, and they didn't want the trees right next to it. So it's quite exposed. There are big Moreton Bay fig trees in the distance, but they'll take 100 years to grow. So in 100 years, it'll be beautiful and shady. But at the moment, I suggest that people go there in the mornings or in the evenings, early morning. That's when it's beautiful.
And so getting back to the materials and what you did, so you didn't need the foundation for a possibility of cracking or the land heaving because of cold. This was just because of the porosity of the sand of the land underneath it that you needed to
Yes.
put this foundation. And it's concrete. It's a concrete dome
Yeah,
foundation.
that's right.
And that's what when your landscape design architect guy came there, he said that this is what had to be done.
Yes. Oh, well, in conjunction with the bureaucrats, the government,
Okay.
that wasn't an architect on staff, but there were project managers from within the state government. And so they have prerequisites that we had to fulfill, and so we were going by their guidelines.
Okay. All right. And so, all right. So then you had a crew come who does that kind of concrete slab stuff, and you had them do that part, and they did that in
Yep.
one day. Was it a one-day thing?
Yes, the slab was all poured, but they had
Yeah.
to. There was a lot of preparation beforehand, putting in reinforcement, and they did a lot of structural engineers did a lot of work beforehand. They dug out the space, and there was all sorts. I don't know what was going on. It was very complicated, but that was, they were in charge of that. The government were. So, I mean, really, once construction was really managed by the government, that we weren't really allowed much say. Once the decisions had been made, because it's public space and, there's all sorts of regulations and reasons why you can't have a private contractor in there. You've got to have things they have to go through the government contracting system.
Okay, I got it. So, but how did you make sure that it was aligned properly? How did you place the entrance, and how did that all
Okay.
come about?
Oh, that was yeah. So when we first painted the labyrinth in the field, I found a dowser who drove up from Canberra, which is a 4-hour drive, to dowse the space and find where the centre of the labyrinth should be in the field. And so he found 2 currents that intersected, and he, hammered in a surveyor's peg and said, that's the centre. It doesn't matter which way it faces, but that's got to be the centre because this is where these, energy currents meet. And so he said people will have a sense of arriving home when they land on it. I said, oh, perfect. That's exactly what I want. So that stake stayed there for the next 1.5 years until they began construction. And then they used that as the surveyors and the engineers used that point as well. In terms of the orientation, at the time I'd got a few kind of, not angry emails, but very assertive emails from people saying that this labyrinth has to face east or it'll be a failure, and if you don't make it face east, you'll waste everyone's time and money. People getting, very passionate about it. Mm. And my instinct was that, well, the space that it's in is a kind of, so it's a field with trees on 2 sides and a pond, and it slopes gently down towards the duck pond, and there's a sort of a hill on the other side. So it's a sort of natural armchair space where you walk through the trees and arrive in the field, and you're quite naturally drawn towards the water. So I'd always thought, and with the grass labyrinth, we just had it facing the water. You just head towards the water. And I also, because for it to face east, for the threshold to face due east, you would have had to come out of the trees, do a sharp left turn, and head that way, and head left, and have the pond over on your right. It didn't make sense, and so my instinct was that it was more important to listen to the land and listen to the wisdom of the space, and create something in harmony with that. But I thought, well, I'm a novice. I better ask the people who know what they're talking about. So I contacted Robert Ferre and Lauren Artress and Jeff Sayward and And the world authority on the Chartres Cathedral turned out to be an Australian, a guy called John James, who lived nearby. So I went to see him, and he said, very wisely, he said, the labyrinth is a geometric system which is whole and complete unto itself. And its purpose is to disorient you slightly so that you can orient yourself with yourself, or yourself with God, or whatever. And not to orient you with anything external, including the directions. So he was very adamant about it. And Lauren and Jeff and Robert were also said the orientation is irrelevant. Just make it make sense for you in space. So then I sat down with the architect and we thought, well, yeah, we just need to justify it to these sort of angry people who are sending emails. So I had to prepare my argument, so I could justify it to the community, because if there was community backlash, the park might back off, So I said just that we're listening to the wisdom of the space. The direction it faces as it is a nothing direction. It's south-southwest 220-something, 27 or 29, and which is a nothing. So no one could attach meaning to that direction. And I wanted it that way. And if we'd aligned it with anything, and east is also a shifting thing, of course. So I thought, well, if someone wants to do something on the solstice or the equinoxes, they can come and turn left in the center of the labyrinth when they get there. Just face the sun if you're coming for the sunrise. That's easy in the center. And so it, to me, honors the integrity of the space by flowing with it, where your eye naturally leads you towards the water. So that's what we did, the orientation.
Sounds lovely. Sounds absolutely lovely. So I got a couple. So what you're saying is that when you're standing at the threshold, the entrance, you look straight ahead towards the pond.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to be clear about that. And one other thing, you talked about the granite. This is the material that you use for the lines, for the design itself?
That's it, yeah.
Okay. And the sandstone is the paths?
The path and the border around it.
And the border, okay. Yeah. And the granite now, did you put a top coating over this to see a sealer of any kind?
No, I don't think they did. It's slip resistant anyway, but I don't think they did. It's pretty hardy. The granite is, hard. It's hard, and in summer the granite heats up. You can't stand on it, whereas the sandstone, you can stand on it barefoot even in summer.
Okay. That's interesting.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I forgot the sandstone here is very porous and easily, to me, it's breakable. But I guess in Australia, it's a different type of sandstone. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's a more dense, mm-hmm. and it's reserved for government use because it's so good. It's such a good stone. It's beautiful honey color, and it's dense. It's great. So no, it won't chip off. I mean, it would if someone hacked at it, but they haven't.
Yeah. So wait, another question. I have all these questions as you're talking.
Sure.
So the whole idea of the bureaucratic loopholes that you had to jump through, basically, in order to get this. Yes. And one of them you said was the slip rate, which means that they don't want anyone slipping and falling and then suing them, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So this is the granite that you picked was the best of four choices that had the least amount of slipperiness. So people, especially in wheelchairs or with walkers or anything, wouldn't hurt themselves.
That's exactly right. And in this, in public spaces, they worry about mold or lichen or anything growing. In this particular field, because it has full sunlight, we won't get that. It won't get moldy. But if you're trying to build something in a space that was shaded, that would be a big issue. Slip test would be a big issue.
Right. Okay. Slip tests. No, okay. So
Mm.
this is a, so you learned a lot going through this process.
I, I did. I went from zero. Yeah.
um, wow. And what was the other thing I wanted to ask you? The whole, so because it's in this park, this city park, the city maintains it now. You don't have to worry about maintenance
Yep.
or anything. They are the ones that
No.
maintain it. They mow around it. They keep it clean.
Yep. 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 And we had an event a few weeks ago, a festival, a labyrinth dreaming festival we had, and so they had the whole labyrinth cleaned before, and they mowed around the field. So yeah, so that's they're doing it. They're looking after it.
So that was the extra 50,000 for maintenance that you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it costs them that much to do it, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, over time, I'm sure they're giving themselves a
yeah,
little. Yeah, over time,
yes,
it'll add up. I'm sure.
yeah,
Um,
yes.
so, was there any? You said no benches or anything, but what about?
Yeah.
Was there a plaque or anything in the sandstone, something to
Yes.
identify it, or some way of letting people know how to walk it? What happens when
Yeah.
people have no clue? They come upon it and they go, "What's this?"
Well, there's a sandstone plinth in line with the threshold about 10 meters back. And it's got some very simple instructions about explaining what it is, saying it's, a path of peace, path of prayer, universal symbol. And it's also got a list. So on the top, it has information about the labyrinth and a link to the website and stuff. And on the front, down below, it has a list of the major donors. So the people who gave $5,000 or more. And that was part of the hook, of course, that they would have public recognition. So that helps as well.
Okay.
In fundraising, I mean, yeah, that
Yes.
they would have a piece of a permanent thing in a public place. So that was, it's an important thing.
Yeah, because very often people will, like the one in the cathedral in Washington D.C. People have donated. They have bricks with a loved
Oh
one's
yeah,
name on it or something,
yeah,
or a bench is named after someone, has somebody's name on
yeah.
it. So it's all part of that uh, donation, fundraising, donor thing.
Well, that's what part of what we wanted with the benches. There were 4 beautiful curved sandstone benches, and we thought, well, we'll get the big donors and they can have their name on that bench, but they nixed the idea of the bench, so we couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was just having their name on the plinth, and for a lot of them, that was more than enough. They're thrilled to be part of that.
Okay. So it's all built. So
Yeah.
now you're harvesting. This is I'm going through the seasons here. So you're harvesting.
Yep.
This is your efforts, the community support. So this was the opening ceremony. So talk about that in September of 2016. What was that like? That event?
No, 2014. It's 3 years
2014.
old.
Okay,
Yeah.
14.
September. Yeah. And so it was it's in the middle of September, 15th of September 2014, beautiful spring day, just like this. And we had, all the donors, obviously. There was 200 or 300 people that came. It was opened officially by the governor, who's a woman called Dame Marie Bashir. And I was thrilled. It was her last week in office, and I was so excited to have her there. She's this wonderful, wonderful woman who, anyway, so she officially opened it. I had 11 wisdom keepers this time. So we had many of the same ones from before. We had, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, and several Christian, like Anglican and Uniting Church, and so as many denominations as we could. Plus, the Ailsa Piper, the writer who was the agnostic pilgrim, because I wanted someone agnostic in the space. And also an Auntie Allie Golding, who was the Aboriginal elder. So she was the first foot on the labyrinth that day. And it made me happy to have it opened by a woman in power with no political affiliation. She was just a woman in power. and the first foot on it was an Aboriginal woman. They were walking to music, which was composed especially for the event, for the opening ceremony, by a composer called Corinna Bonchek. And that music was available free on her website. I don't know, might still be. And it's just a 5-minute piece that you can download, I think. And it was just beautiful. So it was magic watching these. So Auntie Ali was the first one in, the Aboriginal elder, and she kind of danced her way in. And she said to me afterwards that at every single one of the turns, another tribe of her ancestors came to her to bring their blessings. And it was incredible. And then I can't remember who the order, but there was maybe the Catholic priest, and then the imam, and then the rabbi. And so they all made their way in. And when they got to the centre, they were all shaking hands. And people were watching in tears, because it was just the symbolism of having the different faiths all so happy to be together in the centre was just fantastic. So it was a very, very special day. I was so excited. I thought I was going to vaporize that day. I was so excited because I couldn't believe it was finally happening. It was sort of 5 years in after first walking it, so 4.5, whatever.
Yeah.
So it was a very special day. Yeah.
The music. What was it? Were there musicians? What kind of?
No, it was just recorded. She recorded it but with an orchestra. It was beautiful. I'll send you a link because it's just beautiful. She recorded it with the Brisbane Philharmonic Orchestra. And then it was just played. They just had loudspeakers there that day, and everybody walked. And it was a true baptism.
So was it on a loop? So it just played over and over? Or?
Yeah. Well, the longer piece was she did a lot. The downloadable one's about 5 minutes, but she did a 20-minute one. But the walk was I don't know. It went on for about an hour with everyone walking through. Yeah.
And how many people attended?
Oh, I don't know, about 200 or 300. I don't know exactly.
Wow.
It was, so I had chairs for some of the donors. There was at least 100 chairs for donors, and then people just came and sat on the little hill, and it was magic.
So this is a regular short size, so 44 feet in diameter with 18. What is the width of the paths?
Oh, it's exact replica of chart. It's exact. So it's 13
inches or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
those paths are very narrow, but it was flat, so it doesn't matter. Did you have anyone with disabilities there walking?
Not that day, but I've certainly had them since then. I've had friends with wheelchairs, and I had a group of elderly people who had they're walkers, the four-wheel frame things. And it's fine. You don't need it to be wider, just because they can still follow the path.
Yeah, and they all enjoy it, and they don't have any problem. That's great.
No problem.
That's great. Well, that sounds wonderful, that opening ceremony. And it really sounds like you. So, okay, I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to continue. So I'm going to switch from this, and I'll come back to that maybe towards the end. But in terms of taking what you've learned here and what else you're doing in the community. But let's segue into your gathering workshop. And in your gathering workshop, you talk about the 11 gifts, and the workshop it's about this process of building this Centennial Park Labyrinth.
Yes.
So you talk about the 11 gifts of the Spirit that this process yielded, and can you explain a little bit what you mean by that without giving too much away, so people still go to your workshop?
Sure. Well, there were many obstacles along the way with this. There was, challenges of dealing with the bureaucrats. the bureaucratic maze is just an alien concept to me. And there I was, you know, to me, the labyrinth is a mystical path of transformation, and to the bureaucrats, it was just a slab with pavers. So we had a sort of paradigm clash. And so anyway, there were many obstacles, but with the obstacles came many gifts, because I had to learn how to, like, you know, becoming a vessel. I had to learn how to become a vessel for something greater than myself, get my ego out of the way. I had to learn, you know, about accepting the call and what that means. And I wouldn't have called it a call at the time, but now I can see that it was. Trusting the path, learning how to keep putting one foot in front of the other and not get discouraged, even when you feel like everything's crashing down around you. Accepting obstacles for what they are and not taking them personally. Learning how to hold space, that was another new thing for me. And learning how to hold space just, you know, in the walks as a facilitator, holding a space in the art gallery and then in the park, which is a totally different way of holding space because it's not contained. And then the broader thing of holding space for this project and all the people that were coming in, you know, leaning in to help. So it was just holding space on a much bigger scale. And for an extended time, I was holding space sort of for 3 years. We got approval in September 2011, and it opened in 2014, September 2014. So I was holding space for it for 3 years. Then the whole concept of orientation of the labyrinth, orientation of myself. What am I orienting myself to outside myself, and does that serve? The idea of pilgrimage and accepting what's happening along the way. I came to know the labyrinth as a healing path for relationship and for myself, and being able to see the bigger picture, walk into the bigger picture. That was a huge gift of the labyrinth. And learning how to receive, which is part of being a vessel, but the concept of receiving as a broader concept, as a way of, you know, accepting and allowing life and creative force to move through you. And finally, it was about the labyrinth as not just as a path of peace, which it is, and a path of prayer, which it is, but also as another paradigm, a new way of looking at life. Because I read a wonderful book by Daniel Pink called A Whole New Mind, and he talks about the 6 right brain capacities that we need to, you know, thrive in today's environment. It's a business book, but the final chapter is on the need for meaning, and that chapter is all about the labyrinth. And I just thought, wow, if a business writer is using the labyrinth as a paradigm for meaning, then what else is there? You know, the labyrinth as a paradigm for a different way of being in the world. That it's, you know, we're moving from the information age, which could be described as a maze, to the conceptual age, which is more of a labyrinth, you know. And if we could, and then I took it further and started I used to, as part of the fundraising, I was giving talks at various business groups and things around the city, and the theme was, is your business a labyrinth or a maze? You know, and so I was sort of exploring that idea of the labyrinth as a paradigm, as a different way of running your business, running your life, a different way of approaching yourself, approaching your life. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about.
Well, the answers you just gave are another whole
Yes.
many past many visions episode. But we could really get, that's really juicy, and I hope that people will join your workshop and come to your workshop, because I think they'll get a lot out of it. So let's get back to the Centennial Labyrinth. Here you've got Centennial Park Labyrinth. So how have you ensured that this labyrinth and the community that you've created will continue to bear fruit within the city community in the future?
Well, again, part of my service was to make sure that it wasn't all on me, that it was so I brought Lauren Veriditas out twice, first in 2015, and then we did a summer school at the beginning of this year with Lars as well, Lars Howard. And so I wanted to get some facilitators trained up so that they could tend the labyrinth, so that they begin to form a labyrinth community. It's not that I think people have to be trained by Veriditas, they don't, but it was just that's a fast track way of getting people to know a bit about it. And so we have a rolling group of about 20 people now, and they take turns. So the Sydney Labyrinth community is it's not an organisation, it's just a loose affiliation of very dedicated volunteers, and we just take turns once a month. Someone will step forward to lead the monthly walk. We have a regular monthly walk the first Sunday of every month at 9 a.m. There's a facilitator there who gives a little introduction and leads the walk. And so it's a lovely little group that just attend the labyrinth, and, slowly we're building community around it. And so I think that's the best way to protect the labyrinth, is to build community so that there are people going there, and that's what keeps it, safe from graffiti or whatever. The more it gets used and loved, the safer it becomes.
That's wonderful. Really,
and then
really interesting.
And the thing we've just started just in September this year, which was the 3rd anniversary of the opening, we had a Labyrinth Dreaming Festival. So we wanted to do something that would broaden the awareness and get people, general public, in. So it was a free event, and we had 3 facilitated walks that day. It was just a big picnic lunch day. And I got musicians in to people who, so we had a frame drum circle, women's frame drum circle for the first walk. And then we had a djembe drum circle for the second walk. And the third walk was a didgeridoo circle. So we had 4 didgeridoo players. And actually, that was great. The lead didgeridoo player, walked in the labyrinth and led everybody in. And then as they arrived in the centre, he played the didge up and down their body. So they got this incredible burst of, resonant energy, and it was just beautiful. And they walked in regular and they walked out just radiant. They were lit up. And it was great fun. It was this fun, happy, picnic day. And so lots of people came, and having the music there, just acoustic music, gives people another way in, I think, and it makes it a safe space for them. So they were sort of dancing their way in, and then they, it was great. It was great. So I'm hoping that'll be an annual thing.
Yeah, it sounds, music has that way of shifting us from our left brain to the, logical to the intuitive. So it's definitely, and you can't do better than the didge. I've had that experience with the healing of a didge on me and a didgeridoo on me, and it's unbelievable. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So so I think we've sort of created a template now for and we also painted other labyrinths onto the field. So we had a 7-circuit labyrinth, a triple spiral, and the maze. We did it because I thought it was important to honour the shadow in the space. So we had a very simple maze painted on the grass, and so I wanted it to be, all things labyrinth. And we had some people selling products. Mark Healy was selling his labyrinth, wooden labyrinths, and a few other people who make labyrinth-related products had little stalls. So it was fun, and we've worked out how to do it now.
Yeah. Do you do anything for World Labyrinth Day there? That sounds.
Yeah. Well, we do. Yes. There's always a walk there. We do. We don't do. The festival is September at this point because World Labyrinth Day is winter for us.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Right. Yep, that's right. But how about you for yourself? Now you have all this knowledge. You have this experience. You have it's really altered your life.
Yes.
in so many ways. You just were saying the 11 gifts of spirit. Um, what are you doing now for yourself, or are you continuing to offer workshops to the business community? What's up for you in terms of what you see happening for yourself in the future in terms of labyrinths, or where is it going to
Well,
take you?
I still feel like I'm knee deep in labyrinths. You know, I'm kind of like doing the Labyrinth Festival. That was a big deal and that took lots of organisation. But it was sort of more joyful because I wasn't having to, joust with bureaucrats to do it. So we just got permission to do it in the space. And I'm writing a book about these gifts of the spirit. So I'm still in it. And then I'm coming to Seattle, coming to Banbridge Island, I'm coming to Vancouver Island first, which I'm very excited about too, to go and do that little pilgrimage around there. And so for me, this is because I haven't been to the last gathering I went to was in Taos, which was 4 years ago, 5 years, something like that. So for me, it's a kind of, it's not a homecoming quite, but it's like I'm coming back to connect with the tribe, which was always great, tribe of labyrinth lovers. And then on my way back, I'm going back via San Francisco so I can go back to the Grace Cathedral and just walk it once more and, return to the place where I started and know it for the first time. So it's this, I'm completing a sort of circle at this time, and I'm not sure, I'm halfway through the book, I'm not sure, maybe next year, maybe. I'll see. And then I'm not sure what. I'm not doing talks to the business world at this point. I'm just gathering what I've learned, gathering the insights, and but it's still informing me. It's still the lens I look through is a labyrinth lens now. When I have problems or things, it's still, if I have a problem, I take it to the labyrinth and walk my way in to the bigger picture, and try and expand the circumference of whatever I'm dealing with to see the broader view. And so it's still teaching me. Every time I walk it, it's teaching me.
So you're going to do Holly's pilgrimage on Vancouver Island. Is that what you mean? Holly Carnegie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It
Yeah.
sounds like a fabulous lead into the Labyrinth Society gathering. And looking forward to seeing you there. We're basically out of time, I think. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure sharing this hour with you. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been wonderful. I can't wait to see you. I wasn't at Taos, so I'm looking forward to meeting you. And many continued blessings on your path.
Oh, thank you so much, and to you too. It's been fun to talk to you.
Okay, thank you. And so you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions, broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the Labyrinth Society website, Facebook page, and global group. Here we go. It's late at night for me here. For a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode, and may you find what you need on your path through life. Namaste.